Hiruzen looked at all of the clan leaders and advisors conversing with each other about what could be done for Naruto. A couple of minutes later, Hiashi spoke, Sandame-sama, with all due respects, I request permission to adopt and raise Minato's heir, establishing him as part of the main house of the Hyuga family. On hearing those words, Sarutobi contemplated what could happen should he entrust the tutelage and upbringing of Naruto to one of the clan leaders. Seeing their faces, he noted that each of them, even Homura and Kaharu, were more than willing to adopt and raise Yondaimi's only son without question. From what he was visualizing about Naruto's possible upbringing under their wings, however, the results looked anything but appealing. When he visualized what could happen if Naruto was raised by Hiashi, as part of the main branch, he saw Naruto learning a lot from the Hyuga clan as a whole. It was true that Naruto would have been trained in the best arts. However, Hiashi's harsh and cold demeanor was no secret to Sarutobi, and he also saw Naruto adopting and mirroring such a demeanor. Combining that with being trained in the arts of the Hyugas and Minato's arts of combat, Naruto would turn out ruthless and look at everyone else being inferior to him. Not good qualities for a Hokage. Looking at the clan leader of the Uchihas, Sarutobi also saw Naruto learning a great deal from them. Like the Hyuga clan, however, the Uchiha clan was a proud clan because of the power behind their bloodline limit, and because of their arrogance, he saw Naruto having fierce rivalries with Uchiha prodigies and seeking to prove who'd come out as the dominant figure, especially since Naruto didn't possess their bloodline limit or anyone else's for that matter. With the Nara clan, he saw Naruto becoming a more strategic and deadlier killer, since the Nara clan was known for being very skilled in efficient tactics and battle strategies. Especially with their ability to manipulate their shadows. After a long mental deliberation, Hiruzen said, I honestly appreciate your open-minded thoughtfulness in being willing to adopt the child Hiashi, however I must respectfully decline the offer. Hiashi's eyes widened upon hearing this and spoke, Sandame-sama, Naruto possesses great potentials to become one of Konoha's strongest shinobis, and with him under my tutelage, he would become one of the greatest prodigies and Hokages ever produced by Konoha. I acknowledge your good intentions for the child Hiashi and for anyone else here who's willing to take the responsibilities of taking Naruto under their wings. Sandame sighed and continued, however, Naruto needs balance in his life. He's already been infused with a powerful Hokage whose knowledge, wisdom, stamina and abilities will possibly be absorbed into the child in a gradual process as he grows up, no doubt. Because of this, he'll need someone to balance him. For the best intentions of the child, I'll dispatch one of the Anbu here to locate someone of my choosing to raise and teach Minato's heir. Hiashi reluctantly remained silent. Now wasn't the time to argue with the reinstated Hokage, especially after everything that transpired before and after Kyuubi's attack. Are we to inform the villagers about Yondaimi's surviving heir? Asked Homura. No, Hiruzen replied firmly with no hint of hesitation in his voice. Should the people learn that Namikaze Naruto is Minato's only son, chances of Naruto being spoiled and pampered by the villagers would be unquestionably high. The child would grow up to be ungrateful and show little appreciation for the things given to him. The results, however, would be the opposite should he learn to earn what's rightfully his than to simply hand his inheritance over to him. Plus, you have to remember that Minato has made a lot of enemies in many lands, villages and possibly other continents. And as I mentioned before, should enemy villages learn of Yondaime having an heir infused with Minato himself, the results would prove disastrous for both the child and the entire village of Konoha. Everyone in the chamber allowed Sandame's wisely chosen words to be absorbed as they thought about what he said. For this reason, Hiruzen continued, the child's name will be changed. He will adopt the maiden name of his mother as Minato instructed before his battle with Kyuubi. His new name will be Uzumaki Naruto. Everyone will be told that Minato and his entire family have died as a result of Kyuubi's attack. When Naruto grows up and reach a level of maturity that I see appropriate with the ability to look after himself, he will be given everything that belongs to his family and with the truth about his heritage being publicly explained to the people. Everyone present nodded their heads in understanding. Hiruzen remained silent momentarily as he allowed everyone to let his words sink into their minds. With a more serious and firm tone, Hiruzen continued, "Until that time, no one here is make any mention to anyone outside the council regarding the truth about Naruto's true heritage without my or Naruto's consent. If these words of mine are not honored, the act will be regarded as treason, and the punishment will be severe. This is my law as the reinstated Hokage." The Anbu, clan leaders and advisors knew not to take Sandame's words lightly, especially if they didn't want to incur his wrath. End flashback. Sarutobi sighed again as he thought about what happened after the meeting. Flashback. A week ago. Hiruzen, 3 hours after the meeting with the advisors and clan leaders, had called the grand assembly of everyone in Konoha. Many in attendance could only wonder what Hiruzen had to tell them in regards to Kyuubi no Yoko's attack and defeat. Many murmurings were circulating around the assembly until Sandame appeared on the roof of Hokage Tower calling everyone to attention. The people immediately quieted after seeing Sandame Hokage take the stage. "People of Konohagakure no Sato," Sandame addressed everyone, "as you all are well aware, a great monster known as Kyuubi no Yoko have attacked our village for reasons unknown to us. Sadly, many of our people and shinobis have lost their lives in battling the Kyuubi and many parts of our village have been left in ruins. It grieves me deeply that such a terrible event of such evil have befell us." Hiruzen paused for a moment as he looked over at everyone in the audience. Taking a breath, he continued, "Kyuubi would have continued its rampage had it not been for the sacrifice made by Yondaime Hokage who vanished and died moments after defeating Kyuubi no Yoko. It also grieves me to inform all of you that Yondaime's honorable wife, Namikaze Kushina, also died during the attack." Again Sandame paused and looked at the faces of everyone who was there. He knew how everyone loved his successor Yondaime and his wife Kushina, and Sandame was no exception. The villagers knew his wife was pregnant and were really looking forward to the birth of Yondaime's child with high expectations. Although it was true that Minato's wife died, however, it grieved him that he had to make everyone believe that both Minato and his child were dead, but it was for Naruto's own protection. Hiruzen continued, "Yes, the loss of Minato and his family is indeed a great loss, and with all those who lost their lives on this tragic night. But their deaths were not in vain. Minato and all of the brave shinobis and citizens of Konohagakure who died gave their lives to protect the village and everyone they held dear to them. Their deaths therefore were honorable and ought to be commemorated. In spite of all that has happened here on this night, the fact that the village is still in existence testifies to the shining will of fire that burns in all of us, a fire that will not go out into the shadows of the night by enemy's forces. Tonight's events have proven this truth to all of us. Although we can never bring back the lives of those who were lost in the battle, however, we can honor their sacrifices and losses by rebuilding Konohagakure no Sato for a brighter tomorrow. In this way, the next generation of Konoha and all future generations to follow will learn of the great things that their people and ancestors have done for them and their village and proudly carry their spirits and fiery will of the village." The villagers all burst into applause after hearing Sandame's words to them. Needless to say, the people took all that he said to heart. End flashback. Sarutobi snapped out his thoughts when a knock came from the door. "Yes. You can come in." The door opened, revealing a masked Anbu standing at the door. "Sandame-sama," the Anbu spoke as he bowed in respects, "the one whom you have sent for has arrived." Hizuzen nodded his head to the Anbu, giving him permission to allow the visitor to enter his office. The visitor stepped into the office with the Anbu stepping out and leaving the office, giving privacy to both Sandame and his guest, who didn't have a happy facial expression. Sandame knew that this meeting wasn't going to be a smooth sailing one. Sandame and his guest looked at each other momentarily with no words being exchanged between them. After a brief moment of silence between the two of them, Sandame spoke, "Senju Tsunade, it's been a long while." "Yes, it has, Sarutobi-sensei," Tsunade replied to her former sensei. She was currently in her late 30s and was known by many as the Sucker, one of the legendary Sannin. Tsunade remarked, the Anbu you sent to find me told me that a terrible event happened in here a week ago. Judging from the damages and the looks on the people's faces, I'd say a lot more has happened than what the Anbu was willing to let on. Hiruzen. He also told me that there was another major issue at hand here that was a matter of the utmost importance that requires my presence before you. He wouldn't tell me what it was, saying that only you alone could tell me since it was highly confidential for only my ears to hear. Momentarily paused. In truth, I truly didn't want to return to this village again, although I reluctantly did so since you personally requested my audience. Hiruzen sighed. I understand that a great deal has happened in your life which caused you to grow bitter towards your home village, and I won't make any excuses about it. Before Tsunade said another word, her eyes caught sight of a baby's crib that was at the side of Hiruzen's office. Curiously, she went over to the crib and looked inside of it, seeing a week-old baby boy sleeping peacefully inside. Her mood started to lighten up upon seeing the child. Smiling at the newborn, she asked her former sensei, "Who's the cute blonde-haired infant?" "Certainly he can't be your grandchild." "Yes. You're right, he's not my grandchild," Hiruzen replied. "His name is Naruto and he's Yondaimi's son and heir." The Sanin's eyes widened in surprise upon hearing those words. Minato had a kid, Tsunade said in surprise and happily. Speaking of Minato, where is he and his wife Kushina? Is Yondaimi out on some diplomatic business trip in another village with you covering for him here, especially after everything that's happened? And where's the boy's mother? Tsunade saw a certain look on Sarutobi's face, which was a bad omen. Tsunade, Hiruzen started, I humbly ask for you to adopt Minato's child. That was when she looked at her former sensei as if he lost his mind. You want me to do WHAAAT? Tsunade shouted, causing Naruto to wake up and start crying. Hiruzen sighed again as he went over to Naruto, lifting him out of his crib and into his arms, eventually calming the child. Adopt Minato's son? Tsunade asked in disbelief. Have you lost your mind? Exactly where is Minato and his wife? Tsunade. Hiruzen replied quickly, cutting Tsunade off. Please calm yourself down, Tsunade. In a calmer tone he suggested, take a seat, Tsunade. There's something that I have to tell you. Sad to say you're not going to like what you're going to hear. Having no other option, Tsunade pulled up a seat and sat down as her former sensei advised. Hiruzen pulled his office seat over towards his former student and sat down on it with Naruto still cradled in his arms. Hiruzen began explaining, a week ago, the great monster known as Kyuubi no Yoko came and attacked the village. Days before the monster's attack, however, Minato received word from one of his top shinobi about Kyuubi's eventual arrival to Konoha. As you're well aware, Tsunade, Kyuubi's existence was no myth to Konohagakure even before its attack. The people knew what the monster was capable of doing after hearing many stories about the beast's power. Many, however, couldn't understand why Kyuubi was coming to attack Konoha, killing and destroying everything in its path as it made its way to our village. Minato worked night and day trying to find ways of stopping the creature, but had little success. It was a profound burden for him, and the fact that his wife was about to go into premature labor because of the heavy stress and frustration both of them were in wasn't helping. In truth, the villagers knew that Minato was married to a most skilled kunoichi who was pregnant with their child. What they don't know is that she went into labor prematurely because of the intense stress both her and her husband were in on the night of Kyuubi's attack. She was secretly rushed to a private medical tent during the attack where to gave birth to their son. Sadly though, because of his wife's severe emotional distress and weakened condition, Kushina died shortly after giving birth to Naruto, and the news of his wife's death devastated Minato. Tsunade was already feeling her tears building up in her eyes before they started falling free down her face. Sarutobi continued, and what severely added more pain to Minato was the ancient Kinjutsu Ugi he finally found to seal away and imprison the Kyuubi no Yoko. The beast, however, was too powerful to be contained in any inorganic vessel, or animal. This Kinjutsu Ugi required a newborn human child whose umbilical cord was freshly cut, and there was no other child born that night except his own. In performing the kinjutsu, the sealer would have to surrender his or her life for the kinjutsu ugi to take its effects. Sadly, I could still remember the demolished look on Minato's face, when he saw that his whole life's work and the family he so eagerly wanted to have with his wife and son were destroyed within such a short time and reduced to nothing. Even if there was another child born that night, Minato wouldn't have asked any parent to sacrifice their child, or even a child born on that same night who became an orphan simultaneously after losing both his or her parents as a result of Kyuubi's attack, into such a harsh burden, especially if he himself wasn't willing to do it with his own child. Therefore he used and sacrificed his own newly born child and his own life for the ritual to seal away the Kyuubi. It was a tragic and cruel burden that broke Yondaimi's heart, knowing that he lost everything he held dear all in one night, for the preservation of Konohagakure and preventing Kyuubi from doing more destruction and slaughtering than what it already had done. Tsunade started sobbing as more tears came down her face. Hearing this story made her hate the position of Hokage all the more, since she lost loved ones who were in some ways connected with the title of Hokage. Hiruzen himself couldn't help but let a few of his own tears fall from his face while retelling the horrific event in detail. He wiped away the tears that fell upon Naruto's face before he continued. Before Minato went to battle the Kyuubi, he asked for one private moment alone with Naruto. I respected his wish, although I stayed close enough to the tent to hear what Yondaime was saying. While alone with his son in the tent, Minato allowed some of his tears he held back to fall freely, while cradling Naruto in his arms, apologizing and telling Naruto that this wasn't what he wanted for him. I remember him telling Naruto that he wanted him to grow up in a village where he could have grown and matured into a great shinobi and inherit the village's will of fire with both himself and his mother, and be loved by everyone in the village, not only as his honorable son but also as Namikaze Naruto. But Yondaime knew that wasn't to be because of the monster that attacked and ruined all of his dreams. Yondaime knew that he had to do something, since it was both his duty as the Hokage and as a father to protect Konohagakure, to make sure his son had a future in the village he loved so much. Namikaze Naruto, my son, you'll be the hero who defeated Kyuubi no Yoko and saved Konohagakure no Sato, Minato whispered to Naruto before calling me back to explain what he wanted me to do. Yondaime made it very clear that he didn't want the villagers to know of his son's existence, at least not yet. Originally his intention was for Naruto to be regarded as the great hero who saved Konoha by sealing and imprisoning Kyuubi into him. The child's name was changed from Namikaze Naruto to Uzumaki Naruto. He was giving his mother's maiden last name in order to protect his true identity and heritage. Although I wished there was another way to bring down Kyuubi, however, I knew that a severe price had to be paid to stop the creature. Naruto was to be made into a living sacrifice, with his father giving up his life in order to save Konoha and all who live here. Tsunade didn't want to hear the story any further. Her heart was breaking. It was too tragic and horrible to bear. Before she could interject and tell her former sensei to stop telling her the story, Hiruzen added, however, the situation had taken an unexpected twist after the kinjutsu was performed. Tsunade's head shot up upon hearing what her former sensei said. He continued, a very strong chakra made its way towards Naruto and infused itself into the boy's belly. However, this chakra wasn't red as we had anticipated. Rather, it was blue. No one knows what happened to Kyuubi after the kinjutsu was initiated, but one thing is certain, Yondaime was sealed into Naruto. The Sanin's eyes widened in shock and absolute disbelief. She remained silent as her former sensei allowed her to process everything he told her up to now. A moment later, Sandaime went on, no one else outside the village council besides you and a few Anbu who's been sworn to secrecy knows this. As far as the rest of the villagers know, Yondaime, his wife and child are dead, along with many others who lost their lives during the attack. Tsunade was left speechless at everything she was hearing. It was so overwhelming both mentally and emotionally. She didn't know how much more she could handle, and she knew that Hiruzen wasn't finished. As a result of this unexpected turn of events, the council and I realized that the situation concerning Naruto has drastically changed. With the boy having Minato sealed into his being, there's no doubt that he'll undergo certain physical and psychological changes in his development and acquire all, if not most, of everything that made Yondaime Hokage the man and shinobi he became known to be in Konoha and the rest of the shinobi world. You mean to say that Minato will take over his own son's body? Tsunade asked in disbelief. No, Hiruzen quickly replied reassuringly. Rather, Naruto will inherit and absorb his father's knowledge, wisdom, stamina, abilities and chakra in a gradual process as he grows up, basically becoming a born Hokage. The child will still be his own individual person, not Yondaime incarnate. Because of this, Naruto is in more danger than before. It would have been hard enough should we have let everyone know that Minato had a surviving child, with countless people seeking to spoil, pamper or adopt the young boy for their own intentions and possibly to get a hold on Naruto's huge inheritance. It's worse now with Yondaime sealed inside him, and if enemy villages and nations discover this secret, one of two worst-case scenarios could happen. 1. They could either attempt to murder the child, or 2, which is most likely, they'll try to kidnap the child and raise him to be part of their nation, thus corrupting the child and making him our enemy. Either scenarios would prove disastrous for Konoha and Naruto, and perhaps other villages and nations should they cross his path. Sandaime took a moment to look at Naruto, who was now fully awake and looking around the environment he wasn't so familiar with. Sighing, Sandaime continued, "The truth is, I would have gladly took it upon myself to raise the child and guide his upbringing. However, my reinstatement as the Hokage heavily limits the amount of time I can spend with the boy, and I can't entrust him with just anyone in the village, not even with any of the clan leaders or village elders. And the last thing we need is Naruto turning out like Orochimaru. I don't want history to repeat itself with Naruto causing him to become something perhaps worse than Orochimaru himself." Tsunade remained silent. The memory and hurt of Orochimaru's betrayal was still fresh in her mind. Jiraiya isn't the raising little children type, and his role as the author of those books you hate so passionately wouldn't help in the child's development. "For once I agree with you," Tsunade remarked, "although you're being a bit hypocritical since you also read those books like some closet perverts I know." Annoyed by her comment, Sarutobi cleared his throat and continued on with a more serious demeanor. "The fact that I'm asking you to adopt and raise Yondaime's son shows the amount of conviction and belief I have in your ability to raise, control and balance the child since he's been infused with a powerful Hokage. But still, Naruto is an innocent child who's been forced to shoulder this heavy burden without his consent. He needs someone who can properly raise and ensure his tutelage, and show him motherly affections on top of that. I'm more than certain you can also teach him in the advanced arts of medical and healing jutsus." Tsunade heard a lot more than she was bargaining for. It was too overwhelming for her at the moment. Sandaime knew that she already went through a lot in Konoha, and the fact that she lost most those she loved dearly, among them being her grandfather and granduncle, the Shadaime and Nadaime, her lover and her little brother, both of whom wanted to become Hokage, left her with bitterness about her home village. After learning what became of Yondaime and his family, and the village as a whole, it was too much. And now she's being asked by her former sensei to adopt and raise Yondaime Hokage's child as her own. "I need some time to think about this," Tsunade honestly admitted with a most calm demeanor with mixed emotions in her voice. Hiruzen didn't argue with her and replied understandably, "I understand, Tsunade. Take as much time as you need." Tsunade reached out to Sarutobi, signaling to him that she wanted to hold the child. Complying, he handed Naruto over to her. She cradled the fully awakened child in her arms, who seemed to be looking at her in wonder. He yawned and closed his eyes for a moment before looking at her again. "Only a week old and already you have to carry such heavy burden," Tsunade said softly to Naruto as a few tears slid down her face as he gurgled. Hiruzen smiled and watched the scene quietly. Mother and child. Seeing his former pupil smiling brightly down at what he hopes will be her soon-to-be adopted son made Hiruzen suddenly overcome with an overwhelming sense of hope for the future. It was odd how, even in the aftermath of the bleakest days, he had found such a glowing sight. He didn't know what the future had in store for these two, but he was grateful that Tsunade was at least willing to consider adopting the child. Later that night, Tsunade was staying at a hotel for the night, at least one that wasn't demolished or damaged during Kyuubi's attack. She got little rest that night as she thought about everything that happened early that afternoon in Sandame's office. She spent the rest of the day thinking about all that was explained to her in detail from her former sensei and what he was asking of her. In truth, she felt she didn't owe the village any favors, especially after all that she suffered and been through in the village. However, Naruto was a whole other story. He was an innocent child who's been overwhelmingly burdened with so much at a most tender and fragile age. He's only a week old, Tsunade thought to herself as she sat on her bed in her sleeping kimono. It was true that many other children of Konoha besides Naruto have been plagued with a great loss because of that bastard nine-tailed monster. However, Naruto was a very special case. In spite of what happened with all the other children who may have lost their parents, families and friends during the attack, they still had the opportunity to rebuild their lives from scratch and start life anew in the village with the help of their fellow villagers and Sandame. Naruto, on the other hand, couldn't just go about like that, especially since he was infused with Yondaime Hokage. Two of her relatives were the first two Hokages who built Konohagakure no Sato, and they died young. Her little brother and lover Dan both wanted to become Hokage because of their intense love for the village and strong desire to protect it, and they both died young before they could live out their desires. Now she's being asked to adopt and raise a newborn child only a week old who'll inevitably grow and mature into a strong Hokage at an unknown young age, that is if the child lives long enough for that to happen. Life is so cruel to me with its ironies, she thought to herself as she meditated on Naruto's present situation while fiddling with the necklace around her neck, the one that once belonged to her grandfather, Senju Hashirama, Shadaime Hokage. Naruto most likely wouldn't get to live a normal life as a result of the changes he'll undergo. On top that, all of his father's enemies will now become his enemies, and his father has made a lot of enemies before and after becoming Yondaime Hokage. In some ways, the child was going to become the new Yondaime Hokage, she figured, and it was unknown how Naruto was going to turn out since he would develop his own personality that will undoubtedly be influenced with some of his father's characteristics. Naruto is an innocent child who's been forced to shoulder this heavy burden without his consent. He needs someone who can properly raise and ensure his tutelage, and show him motherly affections on top of that. Those were Hazuzun's exact words to her. Tsunade wondered if she was even fit for the role as a mother, sickness she never had children of her own. Sure, she helped out midwives and nursing mothers with their children in the hospitals and observed how they nurtured their babies. But actually playing the role of nurturing a baby is a whole different story, she acknowledged, and she never nurtured children before. After the death of her lover Dan before they had the chance to marry, she lost most of her interests and desires to get married and have children. And now she's being asked by Hiruzen to adopt and raise a child who's inescapably going to develop into a new Yondaime Hokage. Tsunade snapped out of her thoughts as she thought when she heard a knock come from the door. Turning to the door, she said, "Yes. Tsunade-sensei," replied a young feminine voice from the other side of the door, "May I come in?" Sighing, Tsunade answered, "You can come in, Shizune." The young 15-year-old girl entered her sensei's room. Shinuz entered her sensei's room and went over to her. "Are you all right, Tsunade-sensei?" Shizune asked in concern. Tsunade looked at the young girl and said, "I'm fine. Why are you awake?" "I can ask the same of you," Shizune remarked. Tsunade said nothing as she looked away from the young girl. Seeing the expression on the older woman's face, Shizune asked, "Is there something on your mind?" "Beside what Sandame told me," Tsunade remarked, "not much." "What did he tell you?" Shizune inquired. "Do you want to talk about it?" Tsunade turned to face the young teen girl. After what felt like an eternity, Tsunade spoke with a serious tone. "Before I tell you, you must swear to never repeat what I'm going to tell you to anyone outside this room." Shizune felt the firmness of her sensei's voice and realized that what was on her mind was no laughing matter nor something to take lightly. Shizune answered sincerely, I swear it. I give you my sincere word. After taking a breath, Tsunade began relating everything to Shizune in full detail about everything she was told from Hiswan. Shizune listened intently as her sensei told her the story uninterrupted. What the young girl heard shocked her to no end, and there was more Tsunade had to tell her. Shizune already had tears falling down her face with some sobbing upon hearing the harsh and tragic account about Yondaime and his son Naruto. This heartbreaking revelation was beyond anything she was expecting to hear. Tsunade herself let a few tears fall down from her face before wiping them away. After Tsunade was done telling Shizune the full account regarding Yondaime and Naruto, she gave the young teen girl some time to absorb everything she was told. A few moments later, Shizune regained her composure as she wiped away the tears from her face. She turned to her sensei and asked, so no one knows what happened to Kyuubi no Kitsune? Tsunade shook her head, not that anyone is complaining. However, it does raises some concern, at least to the Hokage and myself. But, will you adopt baby Naruto? I have been thinking about that since I left the office, Tsunade admitted. I haven't exactly decided on whether or not I should. Why not? Shizune asked. It's not like you'll be handling him on your own. You'll have me here to help you take care of the child. Besides, I always wanted a baby brother. And who wouldn't want a little brother who's a Hokage? Tsunade looked at her young apprentice with a blank expression. Upon realizing her words, Shizune immediately apologized. Tsunade-sensei, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings and reopen old wounds. I mean, what I meant to say, is. It's all right, Shizune, Tsunade assured, knowing fully well that the Shizune was referring to her late kid brother. I know you weren't trying to offend me. You just got caught up in the moment, that's all. But still, adopting this particular child will be no walk in the park. Hell, adopting and raising any child is no walk in the park and will require a great deal of sacrifices to be made. Tsunade saw the irony with the word, sacrifice, especially since Naruto was originally made into a living sacrifice to protect all of the future generations of Konoha and everyone else. Shizune. However, Tsunade continued, Naruto is not just any child who can be adopted and raised by just anyone. I'm amazed that Sarutobi-sensei went so far as to send one of his Anbu to find me in order to ask me to raise the child as my own son. Sighed, I'm not even sure if I'm even mother material. Don't say such things, Tsunade-sensei, Shizune retorted with conviction. Sure, you're not perfect and have some bad habits, but hey, no one's perfect and we all have our share of problems. But I've been with you long enough to know that you'd make a terrific mother to that child, and so does Sandaime-sama. After all, he wouldn't have gone through so much trouble to find you if he thought you were inadequate or unfit to raise Naruto or any other child for that matter. The Hokage chose you, Tsunade-sensei, out of all people, shinobi, clan leaders and village elders to raise this child who possesses untold potentials. Of course he could have chosen any other mother in the village to adopt Naruto, however he saw something very special in you, Tsunade-sensei, that you might have not seen in yourself to move him to believe so strongly that you were fit to become Naruto's new mother. I strongly believe that you'd make a terrific mother to any child, blood-related or not. And I know your little brother and Uncle Dan would have felt the same way about you. Tsunade stood there in awe at Shizune. Her heartfelt words were filled with wisdom beyond her age. It amazed the older woman that her young apprentice could make her see and acknowledge something like this. Thank you, Shizune, Tsunade said appreciatively as she wiped away the new tears that fell from her eyes before smiling. I really needed to hear that. And those words coming from you really mean a lot to me. Shizune smiled, knowing that she managed to heal and restore her sensei's self-confidence. Unknown to the two women was that there was someone listening to the entire conversation from behind the door. The revelation about baby Naruto possessing Yondaime Hokage inside him and eventually acquiring Yondaime's attributes greatly intrigued the interloper. The possibilities with this new Yondaime Hokage are truly unique, the interloper thought before exiting quietly before being detected. Hours later that night, elsewhere. At an undisclosed location, Naruto was sleeping peacefully in a room guarded outside with two Anbu. No one without authorization from the Hokage himself was allowed into the room. 15 minutes later, the Anbu saw Sandaime making his way towards them. Sandaime-sama, the Anbu said as the two of them bowed in respects to the elderly Hokage who nodded and greeted them. Is everything all right here? Inquired Sandaime. The first Anbu answered, Uzumaki Naruto is resting quietly, sir. No troubles have arisen, Sandaime-sama. That's good to hear, Sandaime replied. I will like to check up on the child now. The Anbu nodded and stepped to the side as Sandaime entered the room before closing the door behind him. Sandaime afterwards quietly walked over to Naruto's crib and looked down at the young boy, before forming a sinister smile on his face. A while later, the two Anbu waited outside the room for Sandaime to exit. As they waited, a voice from behind them asked, Is everything all right here? The two Anbu turned speedily in surprise to see Sandaime approaching them with two other Anbu following him to relieve their fellow Anbu from their watch. Sandaime-sama, the second Anbu exclaimed in confusion, didn't you just enter inside the room a while ago? In seconds Sarutobi registered what just happened as his eyes widened in horror and shock. What? Sandaime exclaimed before running to the door, finding it locked. Shit! Sandaime cursed before breaking the door down, storming into the room with the four Anbu following. They came to see an empty crib and an opened window. Whoever came into the room had posed as him using a henge no jutsu and kidnapped Naruto. But the question was who and how did he or she find out about Naruto? This was exactly the situation that Sandaime feared would occur, and to his horror it didn't take long for this secret to somehow get out. Turning to the four Anbu, Sandaime ordered with full authority, lock the village down and station as many Junins and Chunins at all exit ports to the village as you can. Gather all of the Anbu, and explain to them that Naruto has been kidnapped. Search the village. Search everywhere. I want Naruto found and the kidnapper brought in alive for questioning. We need to find out if he or she is working alone or with an accomplice. Hi. The four Anbu complied, disappearing in a puff of smoke. Turning to the empty crib, Sandaime thought, this is exactly what I feared. Enemy forces coming against us during our weakest and most vulnerable moments right after a most catastrophic event. Yondaime, for your son's sake and the sake of the entire village, I hope Naruto will be found and brought back safely and fast. Meanwhile, Tsunade was finding it hard to sleep with all the commotion going on outside. She put the pillow over her head to try to drown out the noise, but it was to no avail. Frustrated, she got up and walked over to her bedroom door and opened it. Upon stepping out though, she stepped on something with her barefoot. Looking door, she saw something that wasn't in the apartment before, which didn't belong to either her or Shizune. It was a notepaper that had names of clans and organizations written down on it. Someone was here, Tsunade realized. A moment later, Shizune ran into the apartment and went over to her sensei. Tsunade-sensei, Shizune called out. Turning to the young girl, Tsunade asked, what is it? All of the exits ports have been sealed off, Shizune explained, the village is under complete lockdown by order of the Hokage. From what I've heard, there's been a kidnapping of some sort. It hit Tsunade like a ton of rocks as she looked at the notepaper in her hands. Clenching the paper tightly until it was crumbled in her fist angrily, Tsunade said, wait here. Not waiting for a reply, Tsunade stormed out of the apartment. Tsunade-sensei, Shizune cried out, but her cries fell on deaf ears as Tsunade speedily ran out to pursue and apprehend the kidnapper. She didn't care about the fact that she was barefooted and still in her sleeping kimono. All that mattered to her was getting to and rescuing Naruto in time. From breaking an entry into her private lodging to kidnapping the newborn that was meant for her to adopt, for what it's worth, the culprit behind these crimes have just incurred her wrath. That night, The Anbu were dispatched to rescue and bring back Naruto by whatever means necessary. The villagers had no idea what was going on as the Anbu made thorough all-out searches of everyone's homes, restaurants, shops, clubs, taverns, wherever they could think of. Among the Anbu on the search was a teenager named Hitaki Kakashi, who lost his sensei and master, Yondaime Hokage, a week ago to Kyuubi no Yoko. He was still affected by the event and loss of his master, although he tried not to show it. Kakashi already knew who Naruto truly was and why he was kidnapped. He wasted no time or energy in searching for the son of his master, determined to locate and return Naruto and protect him. Kakashi, with all of the Anbu, had to take an oath of secrecy not to reveal Naruto's true identity and heritage to anyone under severe penalty from the Hokage himself. The Junin and Chunin in the meantime were under direct orders of the Hokage that no one was allowed in or out of Konoha until the search was over. It was no secret to anyone that something very big had happened, seeing that Sandaime Hokage ordered a massive lockdown and search of this magnitude. If anything, it was the last thing they needed, especially since Kyuubi's attack was merely a week ago and practically no one healed from it. Meanwhile, a very beautiful woman with brown eyes, long blonde hair and a most slender and nicely built figure and large breasts was running and leaping from roof to roof at top speed like a true athletic shinobi. Although it already dawned on her that she was barefooted and only in her sleeping kimono which was flying with the wind and movements of her body, however, right now that was of little importance to her. All that mattered to her was getting to Naruto and fast. After seeing the names written down on that sheet of paper she found in her hotel apartment, to say that the kidnapper was up to no good was understatement. Taking a break on top one of the buildings to catch her breath momentarily, Tsunade scanned the area to see if there was anything that seemed out of place. So far, all she saw were the Anbu making searches of every building they were going into and the Junin and Chunin remaining at their posts. The search for Naruto had gone for almost an hour and the kidnapper was still at large. She decided to head to where Naruto was last seen. Elsewhere, a few of the other Anbu were searching around the room Naruto was in earlier to see if the culprit left any clues behind that might provide a lead as to where he may have ran off to after kidnapping Naruto. Tsunade jumped down from one of the roofs of the building and gracefully landed down on the surface, running over to the small house that once housed Naruto. Stealthily she searched around the outside section of the small house, searching for anything she could find that would serve as a lead from her. So far she found nothing, which served to frustrate her. She knew that the kidnapper couldn't have gotten too far with all the Anbu in pursuit of him in an all-out manhunt. Her ears soon picked up on a conversation between two Anbu. They were conversing with each other on how the kidnapper used a henge no jutsu to deceive their two Anbu comrades into thinking he or she was Sandaime. That was when it dawned on her that the kidnapper wouldn't have so foolishly attempt to make an all-out escape from the village so quickly with every Anbu after him or her. Most likely, he or she was hiding somewhere in the village. Leaving the scene, Tsunade went to search for anything that seemed out of place in the village. The Anbu were still searching everywhere, with no success. It's been 3 hours and no one has seen either the criminal or the child anywhere. The Junins reported that no one at the stations attempted to leave or enter the village. Sandaime was growing frustrated as he was angry, but managed to maintain a calm demeanor. Tsunade decided to redo her search all over as she ran and leapt from roof to roof. As she was on the move, her eyes fell on a particular young Anbu whose name was Kakashi. She recalled whose student Kakashi was in his status among the Anbu. She was about to take off when something caught her attention. Some of the other Anbu approached him asking why he strayed from where he was assigned to search. He made a quick excuse before taking off to perform his job as the other Anbu went on their way. Tsunade decided to secretly follow Kakashi and see where he was going. As she continued following after Kakashi, she noticed how he was heading in the wrong direction, completely off course from where they said what was supposed to go. Something unprofessional of an Anbu who was supposed to know the routes of Konoha inside and out. Something was up, she realized as she continued secretly following after him. She soon noticed that he went into a small hut of some sort for a few moments and came out with what looked like a backpack filled with additional searching gear. Kakashi then took off towards the main exit port where he met up with two Junins stationed at the port. Acknowledging his higher rank and explanation for him to begin his search on the outer skirts of the village, the two Junins stepped aside as Kakashi hurried out from the exit port. Tsunade saw this and gave way to chase speedily before the Junins noticed her presence and departure. A while later, the same two Anbu went to regroup with four other Anbu when they ran into a most familiar Anbu who was heading towards them with Sandame. Kakashi, as the first Anbu, what are you doing here? Didn't we just meet up with you a while ago? What do you mean? Kakashi asked. I was with Sandame-sama for the last hour. That was when it dawned on Kakashi, Sandame and the other Anbu. Which direction did you see the other me ran to? Kakashi asked as he, Sandame and the other Anbu gave way to chase after the phony. It was clear that this kidnapper was a clever and elusive deceiver, whoever he or she was. Meanwhile, Kakashi was running through the forest with the backpack leaping from tree to tree at top speed. Tsunade was in hot pursuit of Kakashi, but kept a safe distance until she knew where he was going. As of now they were a good distance from the village and Tsunade didn't like where this was going. Soon she saw him touch down into clear open field but she kept herself hidden in the trees as she looked on. After making sure he was in the clear, Kakashi placed the backpack down on the grass and dispelled the henge that was around him. Kai, he said as the henge collapsed, revealing his true appearance. The man was geared in a standard Konoha Junin uniform. He had brown hair and a Konoha forehead protector that had a slash across it. Clearly this shinobi is a missing nin of Konoha, Tsunade realized. This helps to explain how he was able to deceive and elude the Anbu, Junin, and Chunin. He might even be a former Anbu himself. Tsunade soon saw that the henge on the backpack also dispelled, revealing none other than baby Naruto sleeping in a carrying baby basket with two straps to place over your shoulders. The missing nin looked over at Naruto and said, Yondaime Hokage, reduced to an inescapable captivity inside your own child, a fitting undoing for the likes of you. I'm sure I can get a hefty price from any village or clan who'd love to buy your child. That's not going to happen, declared a feminine voice. Realizing he wasn't alone, the missing nin looked around and shouted, Who's there? Show yourself. As if on cue, Tsunade leapt from the tree she was on and landed down on the ground facing her enemy. Her beauty and current appearance, however, was anything but what the kidnapper was expecting. Seeing that she was barefooted and barely had anything on besides her sleeping kimono and what little fabric was underneath it with the wind blowing the kimono, the missing nin fought hard to maintain his composure and not suffer from a massive nosebleed. Upon seeing her face, the kidnapper recognized who the blonde beauty was. Senju Tsunade, he said, one of the legendary Sanins. Didn't expect to find you out here on this night barely dressed. I didn't know you were that type of kunoichi. Shut up, Tsunade retorted angrily, you're the one who broke into my hotel room. I did, he admitted. Tell me though, how did you know I broke into your apartment? You left traces of your intrusion, she replied, showing him a crumbled piece of paper, a list of clans, villages and organizations. The missing nin cursed under his breath and answered, originally, after I found out about you returning to Konoha, I was going to attack and kidnap you while you slept, and sell your body to the highest bidder. However, after overhearing the conversation between you and that little girl concerning Yondaime and his son, I saw that kidnapping and selling the child instead would bring me more money than any Sanin's body could. Bastard, Tsunade retorted as she got in her fighting stance, you will not leave this land with the child. Oh, replied the missing nin, and you intend to stop me, I presume. All right then, I'll take you out and sell both you and the child. Performing some hand seals, the missing nin said, Kara number Suyosa no Jutsu. Tsunade at that moment felt as though something was torn out of her as she fell to the ground on her knees and left hand while holding onto her chest with her right hand. She was breathing hard and felt unexplainably weak throughout her body. What did you do to me? Tsunade growled as she forced herself up with the remaining strength she had left. Smiling sinisterly, the missing nin relied, I took away your super strength. I'd be a fool to think I could directly engage you in combat and think I would come out as the victor while you're in your prime. All I had to do was spike your tea earlier with an elixir of my own creation and wait for the elixir to saturate into your body. It also neutralizes your chakra, preventing you from performing ninjutsu and genjutsu. Like I said earlier, my original intentions was to attack and kidnap you while you slept after I activated the poison. Damn you, Tsunade cursed. No matter. I'll protect Naruto. You wanna get this fight started or should I go first? The missing nin smirked at her, pulled out and placed on a claw gauntlet with long razor-sharp steel blades over his right hand. The missing nin stated, since you insist on fighting. The missing nin charged at Tsunade, thrusting his right hand at her. Tsunade dodged the attack swiftly as he continued slashing at her. After a couple of minutes, Tsunade soon took the initiative and went after him. Before the icing nin took to flight, Tsunade struck him, sending him pummeling across the ground. He ain't so tough, Tsunade thought confidently. The missing nin got up off the ground and looked over at his opponent, seeing that she was in a ready-to-fight stance with her fists out ready to pummel him all over. Charging forward, the missing nin yelled and rushed over to Tsunade, who was awaiting his arrival. Upon arriving, Tsunade jumped to the air and flipped behind the criminal shinobi. The missing nin turned in time to see Tsunade punch him square in the face, knocking him down and away from her again. Did you really thought you had a chance against a Sanin like me? The missing nin gave a sinister laugh as he stood back up again and said, well, if you want the answer that badly, I'm afraid that your only way to get it is to try to beat it out of me, if you can. Have it your way. The Tsunade charged at missing nin as he stood there waiting for her. Tsunade geared her fist out to strike the kidnapper. The missing nin, however, stepped to the side as Tsunade's fist missed its target. The criminal shinobi jumped to the side as Tsunade turned to face him. She was clearly able to feel her remaining strength leaving her body as a result of the elixir absorbed into her body. Still, she had to fight on, not for her sake, but for Naruto's. Resorting to taijutsu, Tsunade charged at the missing nin, ready to throw her hurricane of punches and kicks. The missing nin, however, dodged and evaded every last one of her attacks as she just kept coming. The female Sanin pressed on as she tried to land a blow on him, but he just was too fast for her, a result of the poison and jutsu he used on her. The kidnapper leapt from her, then dashed speedily past her before her eyes could catch sight of him. What the? Here I am, shouted the missing nin. Charging like an uncontrollable bull, the missing nin rushed at Tsunade and rammed right into her, thrusting her off the ground and flying some distance away till she collided straight into a tree, hard, with a solid thud. Tsunade struggled to get back up after feeling the brute impact from the last attack. Her body was in pain all over. Tsunade said weakly, What the hell was that? It felt like I was punched by a summoning beast. The missing nin was standing where he was, looking at the female shinobi struggling to regain some of her strength. What's the matter? He taunted. Did I slap you that badly? Tsunade hissed at him. Ooh, you still have some fight left in you. I'll remedy that. Tsunade charged at him again. Punch after punch, kick after kick, Tsunade kept trying to land a blow on him, but she was unsuccessful as the jutsu is still depleting her stamina. Missing nin blocked and evaded all her attacks. Pulling away, Tsunade took a moment to catch her breath as the missing nin stood where he was, looking at her with a mocking expression. Is that all you got? He sneered. If you're through catching your breath, I think it's now my turn to come for you. The missing nin rushed at Tsunade and started his assault on her. Tsunade did all she could to block and evade as many of his attacks as she could. However, it was hard for her to keep up as a number of his punches and kicks found their way to strike her. Tsunade was now on the receiving end of all his swift and highly fast punches and slashes with his claw gauntlet as he just kept coming. She screamed every time from the tremendous pain and damages the steel claws inflicted on her. The missing nin then delivered a round kick at her, sending her off the ground away from him. Tsunade stumbled and rolled on the ground. Still, she eventually stopped. She was now in more pain than she was earlier. Her slender and silky body was covered in dirt and dry mud, and she had multiple bruises and slashes around her face and body. She was bleeding all over, and her sleeping kimono was torn all over and stained in her blood. It's a pity that I had to tear apart and desecrate such beauty, the missing nin remarked. Tsunade, although in a great deal of pain, struggled to get back up to face her enemy. It was a while, but she managed to stand back up again. Ready for more, the missing nin mocked. You're dead, Tsunade snarled. You first. With the remaining strength she had left, Tsunade ran to the missing nin and started fighting with him again, trying to throw as many punches at him as she could. But to no avail, she was unable to hit him once as he kept dodging all her punches. The missing nin then punched her away as she fell to the ground. He then yelled and dashed toward her with intent on hurting her more. Tsunade saw him leap and flip to the air before suddenly he cast his feet down in a landing position to land on top of her feet first. Seeing this, Tsunade quickly rolled away as he landed down on the ground, only to see him jump back up again and land on one of the tree branches. Finding where he was, Tsunade ran to one of the tree and ran up it to reach the same height as him. Afterwards, she pushed herself off the tree and threw herself towards him on the tree he was standing on with her fist out. The missing nin was knocked off the tree and was sent falling straight down to the ground on his back as Tsunade landed where he was previously standing. Seeing where he was lying, Tsunade jumped off the branch with her feet in a land position to land on his chest. Missing nin, however, saw this and curved his legs back and placed his feet up. Tsunade gasped when she saw this, but was unable to get away as she landed down on his feet. After making contact, the missing nin thrust her away back high into the air. Tsunade flipped in the air as she now started to descend down from the air. The missing nin flipped back up and saw Tsunade making her way toward him. Before she could land, he rushed and speedily jumped toward her and delivered a solid kick to her chest, sending her flying straight into a nearby tree that she crashed into before hitting the ground and lying there motionlessly. Seeing that she wasn't getting back up, the missing nin took it that he came out the victor and said, I must say, Tsunade, taking you down even when you're weakened was no easy feat. No bitch like yourself has ever caused me so much trouble. Upon hearing that, Tsunade tapped into a newfound strength. If there was one thing Tsunade never took kindly to, it was being called a bitch. The missing nin turned and started off towards Naruto, failing to take notice of what was happening behind him. With a newfound strength, she stood back up, no longer feeling any pain through her already battered and cut up body. The missing nin felt a very strong killer intent from behind him. He turned around and saw Tsunade standing there with a facial expression that sent a cold chill down his back. With eye-popping speed, Tsunade dashed to the missing nin and delivered a rock-hard punch to his face, sending him flying off the ground before beating on him with excessive brutality and speed. The missing nin had neither the time, strength, speed nor ability to evade this new and brutal attack as he was being clobbered, punched, and kicked all over from head to toe at pure speed with devastating efficiency. Tsunade then jumped and thrust both of her feet straight into his chest, sending him flying fast off the ground into the air before crashing hard into a tree, forming a body-shaped dent into the tree. His body was heavily battered and he also had a blood coming down his mouth. The missing nin had no strength left in him to move or fight anymore. During the assault, Tsunade, being an expert in human anatomy, inflicted severe damages to certain parts of his body, organs and nervous system, making him completely vulnerable and defenseless to any attack. Tsunade slowly walked over to the battered kidnapper as he looked at her coming towards him. Reaching him, she looked down at him with a cold, unsympathetic expression on her face. Tsunade was able to see the expression of anger on his face, but she was able to see that his eyes reveal the actually truth to her. She saw the fear radiating through his eyes. He was very afraid, even though he was trying not to show it. He wanted to move and fight, but found himself incapable of doing anything. Tsunade soon heard Naruto wake up and begin crying for attention. Seeing that the kidnapper was no longer a threat, Tsunade went over to tend to Naruto's needs. Reaching the baby, Tsunade knelt down and picked up Naruto from the carrying backpack while keeping him wrapped in his blanket. Sitting down on the grass while leaning up against a tree nearby, Tsunade cradled and rocked Naruto in her arms, calming him down. Despite the fact that her body was going numb, she smiled brightly at Naruto as he gurgled. She moved closer to him and planted a soft kiss on his forehead. "My little Naru-chan," Tsunade said affectionately, "I risked my life to save and protect you. And I'll happily do it again for you, my little Naru-chan." Moments later, Sarutobi, Kakashi and the Anbu arrived on the scene and saw a heavily battered and weakened Tsunade singing and cradling the now sleeping Naruto in her arms affectionately in spite of her horrid condition. Not too far away was the culprit lying motionless on the ground and in a great deal of pain. "Tsunade," Sandaime called out worriedly as he and the others ran over to her. She smiled brightly as her eyes grew heavier and heavier before being sent into a world of total darkness. Tsunade's eyes opened up to a new environment as bright lights hit her eyes. She strained a little before her eyes readjusted themselves to the environment. She found herself in patient's clothes and lying on a medical bed with bandages around some parts of her body and face, but the pain she had before was gone. There was an IV needle inserted into her right arm within a few wire attached to her upper chest area where her heart and lungs were monitoring her vitals. She realized that she was at Konoha Hospital. Looking around her room, she saw that it was nicely decorated and had bouquets of various flowers with Yamanaka florist shop's compliments. There were wrapped gifts, baby accessories, congratulation and get well cards seated on 2 tables. Sitting up, she then turned and found Naruto resting peacefully in a medical baby crib stationed next to her bed. She smiled bright upon seeing that Naruto was safe and without so much of a scratch on him. Several minutes later, the door opened revealing Shizune, Kakashi, in his Anbu gear and dog mask, and Sandaime entering the room before closing the door behind them. "Tsunade-sensei," Shizune said happily, "you're finally awake. I was so worried." "How long was I out?" Tsunade inquired. "Nearly 4 days, Sandaime answered. "That missing nin contaminated you with a massive overdose of chakra poisoning. If you were an ordinary woman, you'd have certainly died within mere minutes. But because you're one of the Sannin, the poison didn't kill you, rather it served to severely weaken and eventually paralyze you. You fell into a coma after the poison took full effects on you. Needless to say, I'm happy we found you when we did after your battle. The crippled and disabled missing nin has been handed over to Ibiki for interrogations after we found that notepaper of his. Aside that, the doctors were able to fully heal you and completely remove the poison from out your body. Since then you've made a full recovery and will be able to leave this hospital very soon." "How did you explain the whole village lockdown and search incident?" Tsunade asked. Smiling, Sandaime explained, "I explained to everyone that your newborn son was kidnapped by a traitorous shinobi who was intending on selling away your child to one of our enemy villages and that you went after the kidnapper yourself in spite the fact that the Anbu was on the job. If anything, kidnapping the son of one of the loyal legendary Sannin is an S-class crime. That explains all of the gifts and other valuables found here in my room," Tsunade acknowledged. "Everyone believes Naruto to be my son." Officially, Sandaime interjected and smiled, "He is your son. Senju Uzumaki Naruto is now his new official name. I already took care of all of the documentations and paperwork. You're officially his new mother." Tsunade smiled brightly on hearing that. Looking over at the still sleeping Naruto, she lifted him off his bed and cradled him in her arms affectionately. Looking at her, Sandaime said, You doubted whether you'd make a good mother to the child Tsunade. But after what Shizune explained to me and what I saw for myself after your battle with the kidnapper, I knew I made the best choice. Sighed. It grieves me though to think that all this time I was so worried about enemies from the outside kidnapping Naruto when also I should have been worried about potential traitors from inside these village walls. And it nearly cost us greatly. We live and learn, Sarutobi-sensei, Tsunade remarked. We can't always predict what'll happen next. Kakashi removed his Anbu dog mask and went over to the Naruto who was still resting in Tsunade's arms. He looked at the child with interest and said, I'm still trying to accept the fact that my master is trapped inside his own child. The irony of the situation is rather unique. It's a shame I won't be able to take care of the born Hokage child myself. After all, Naruto is the son of my master and is his father's former student. Kakashi, Sandaime interjected, causing the Anbu to turn to him and stand at attention. We already discussed that you'll be too busy as an Anbu to raise and look after Naruto, and I made it very clear that the boy will need balance in his life. Kakashi. However, Sandaime continued, after what happened a few days ago, it's clear that the boy will be facing dangerous enemies from both in and outside these village walls. Especially since that notepaper we found had names of a few of Yondaime's enemies. Personally, I'd hate to image what would happen if Yondaime's enemies were to get a hold of Naruto. Therefore, I would like for you to keep an eye on Naruto from time to time. Kakashi nodded wordlessly, willing to accept the task if that much. Sandaime returned his gaze back at Tsunade and said, Tsunade, since you'll be raising Naruto, I took care of the matter of where you, Shizune and Naruto will be residing at. You three will be living in a nice-sized two-story house not too far from the Hokage Tower. The Genins have already moved all of both your and Shizune's things there. How much is it going to cost me? Tsunade joked, although she was truly in debt to some people whom she owes money to, some of debts resulted from her gambling habits. It won't cost you a thing, Sandaime assured, I bought the house and it's fully paid for. Everything else though will be on you. Except the gifts, of course. Tsunade smiled and nodded wordlessly. Now with that taken care of, I'll be returning back to the Hokage Tower, Sandaime said. I'll assign some genins here to take all of the gifts and accessories here and bring them over to your new house, Tsunade. Kakashi stand guard outside the room until the genins arrive here. Tsunade will be leaving for her new home this afternoon. Kakashi nodded before putting his mask back on as both he and Sandaime exited the room, leaving both Shizune and Tsunade alone in the room with Naruto. The two women looked at the child who was now fully awake in Tsunade's arms. Life was going to be pretty interesting for Tsunade, Shizune and Naruto. A month later, reconstruction of Konohagakure no Sato was currently underway. Everyone was working together to rebuild the village and help whomever were in need of relief and comfort because of Kyuubi's attack. Tsunade and Shizune were living in their new two-story house with Sandaime's compliments. They couldn't live in the Namikaze manor for obvious reasons since Naruto wasn't of age to claim his inheritance, however they were satisfied with what Sandaime gave to them. It was a nicely sized house, comfortable enough for the three of them since they were going to be the only ones living there. Tsunade was provided with gifts and accessories any new mother would need in caring for a newborn, from diapers, water and milk bottles, a stroller, baby clothes, the works. She took it that this treatment was given to her because she was the legendary slug Sannin, but she sure as hell wasn't complaining, especially since she didn't have to pay it back, much to her delight since she was already in a high debt rate. Over the month both Tsunade and Shizune looked up various books on child psychology and parenting and applied whatever helpful advice they found. As challenging as being a mother was, Tsunade was growing fonder of the role than she ever expected, and Shizune could testify to that. A week later, that afternoon at the Senju residence, Shizune was walking towards Tsunade's bedroom with a bowl of warm water and a washrag. Tsunade had intended on cleaning Naruto after he woke up from his nap. Reaching the door, she knocked on it and waited for a reply. Yes, Tsunade asked from inside her room. May I come in? Shizune asked. Need you ask? Tsunade sighed. Just come in. The door isn't locked. Complying, Shizune opened the door and proceeded into the room. Tsunade-sensei, I got the bowl of warm water you ask. Shizune wasn't able to continue her statement when her eyes came upon a shocking sight. In front of her was Tsunade sitting on her futon Indian style with her sleeping kimono fully opened and hanging around her back and arms, exposing most of her slender body and white panties, leaving little to the imagination. Her long blonde hair was flowing freely down her bare back and shoulders. As for her injuries she had after her battle with the kidnapper, Tsunade's full recovery revealed not a single scar or blemish, much to her delight. Being cradled in her arms was Naruto, who to Shizune's surprise was sucking on Tsunade's left breast while her bra was resting at the side on her futon. Shizune almost dropped the bowl of water had she not regained her composure from the shock. Tsunade-sensei, Shizune exclaimed, when did you started breastfeeding? I started 8 days ago. Tsunade smiled as she looked down to see Naruto continuing to draw milk from her breast. 8 days ago, Shizune repeated in surprise and shocked that she wasn't aware of this. That's right, Tsunade confirmed. I used a new highly advanced chakra-induced medical jutsu I created. It took me over 3 months to create and perfect it. I call it Yudo Togi no Jutsu. It's a new medical jutsu for women who wish to be infant nursing women, or wet nurses so to speak. I'm the first to use this prototype medical jutsu of my own creation, and as you can see, it turned out to be a real success. Maybe I'll teach this jutsu to you someday. Shizune blushed heavily upon hearing that as she watched the scene in amazement as she noticed that Tsunade had a new glow to her, one she has never seen since Nawaki and Dan's deaths. Over the past couple of weeks, she noticed the gradual changes Tsunade's behavior was undergoing as she started being more attached to Naruto. Needless to say, the young girl was happy to see Tsunade breaking out of her hard and cold shell that would have completely overtook her had it not been for Sandame's sincere supplication to her to adopt Naruto. Basically, adopting Naruto was Tsunade's remedy for her cold demeanor and cooling down her lust for gambling, since she had to focus her time, strength and money taking care of a child now. The two females were so engrossed with their circumstances that they failed to realize that someone had entered into their house uninvited. Upon walking in on them from outside the room though, "Ah!" cried the intruder, who was sent flying and crashing into the wall as a result of a massive nosebleed after seeing Tsunade's current manifestation and what she was doing. "What the hell?" Tsunade shouted after hearing the thud. The sound of the crash snapped both Tsunade and Shizune back to reality as they looked to see who their intruder was. Tsunade growled under her breath angrily upon seeing whom their guest was, who was twitching a little with blood coming from his nose and a very perverted smile on his face with drool coming from his mouth. All of people, Tsunade said sourly as her right eye twitched several times. He had to show up unannounced. Jiraiya-sama, Shizune said a bit worriedly as she went over to the now unconscious hermit who was also in his late 30s. 15 minutes later, Jiraiya had regained consciousness and his composure long after Tsunade dressed herself in her regular clothes. She would have forced him to clean up the mess he made had Shizune not volunteered to do herself, saying that she didn't want to risk Naruto catching anything from Jiraiya. Tsunade was sitting at a table with Naruto fully awake and being cradled in her arms. Jiraiya was still across them with a most intrigued expression on his face. "So it's all true," Jiraiya said as he looked at his former teammate and the child she was mothering. "Sandame-sama told me everything that has happened in regards to Kyuubi's attack after I came by earlier today. I had to see it for myself, and what I saw just moments ago went far beyond what my expectations were. The boy's living a genuine privilege not given to just anyone, and he's not even related to you." Tsunade frowned and snarled at Jiraiya, not missing the perverted meaning behind his statement, while Shizune looked at the older man in disgust. "Why are you here anyway?" Tsunade inquired, "and how did you manage to get inside my house when the door was locked?" "1. As a legendary shinobi I can pick locks," Jiraiya replied, Also, I received word that Konoha was attacked by the great nine-tailed fox demon and that my best and prized student lost his life stopping the monster. Jiraiya went on. I hurried as fast as I could after hearing this and went straight to Sandaime, who told me everything. I'm surprised he didn't request me to take Naruto under my wing, seeing that I taught and trained the boy's father. Although you did, however, Tsunade retorted, you're not father material nor a good influence. What? Jiraiya shot back, that's a load bullshit. Jiraiya cut himself short upon seeing what he was about to say. Shizune saw the look her sensei's face as she eyed Jiraiya with a look that said, watch your mouth or die. With a calm demeanor, Tsunade said, I'm sure Sandaime-sama informed you of the balance Naruto needs in his life. Since Yondaime-sama was your best student, all of what you taught him will be gradually absorbed into Naruto. But until that time, he'll need to be protected. That goes without say, Jiraiya agreed, I'm aware of what happened between you and that missing nin. I'll keep in mind not to come between a mother and her child. Tsunade smirked. Jiraiya at that point got serious. Though the boy will gradually absorb Yondaime's knowledge and his other attributes, however, he'll need someone to help him understand how to use and control it. Something like what Naruto will experience as he grows up could more than likely overwhelm and possibly drive him insane, which would be catastrophic for both himself and everyone else, and he'll need us to help him through it. An insane Yondaime would plunge Konoha into the ground. Since I taught the boy's father, it's only appropriate that I do likewise with his son and help where I can. Tsunade thought about what Jiraiya was telling her and she found a measure of truth in his words. After contemplating on it, she replied, I see where you're getting at. Something like what you say could happen if not prevent, and it could spell disaster. Nevertheless, I won't let that happen. I'll do whatever I must to protect my son, no matter the cost. Jiraiya was seeing how attached Tsunade was becoming to Naruto, especially after hearing the special emphasis she placed on the word, my. It wasn't too surprising seeing how attached she was to her kid brother Nawaki and lover Dan before they were killed. If anything, Jiraiya acknowledged, Tsunade was not about to lose Naruto for whatever reason. Ironies can be so cruel sometimes, Tsunade, Jiraiya thought. Just then, Tsunade smelled an unwelcoming odor coming from the bundle she was cradling. Sighing, she got up and prepared to change Naruto. Shizune got the sterilizing wipers and clean diapers, handing them over to Tsunade as she changed and cleaned Naruto. All the ninjutsu, genjutsu, kinjutsu, and medic jutsu in the world, Tsunade complained, and not one diaper change no jutsu. Shizune and Jiraiya stifled on a laugh that partially leaked from their mouths upon hearing that. Tsunade finally finished change and clean her son. All done, Tsunade said happily before telling Shizune to get Naruto's food to her. Complying, Shizune went and prepared Naruto food before returning. Looking over at Tsunade, Jiraiya asked, you wouldn't mind if I hold little Naruto, would you? Tsunade thought about it and after a few seconds she decided to grant her former teammate's request. Taking Naruto into his arms, Jiraiya held and looked at the young boy. Who'd have thought that my best prodigy would have ended up in this circumstance, Jiraiya thought. If the Akatsuki were to actually get a hold of Naruto, I can only imagine what horrors would become a reality if they were to mold him in their cruel likeness. Moments later, Shizune came back Naruto's food and set it down on the table. Tsunade took Naruto back from Jiraiya and began feeding Naruto herself. Jiraiya watched quietly as Tsunade tended to Naruto's needs with much affection. He recalled that the last time she was ever this affectionate was during the times Nawaki and Dan were still alive. It amazed Jiraiya that Naruto had such an impact on Tsunade's life, excluding the fact that he's the son of Yondaime Hokage. Getting up off his seat, Jiraiya said, well now, I must be on my way now. I'm late for my new research I have to do. Tsunade knew all too well what Jiraiya had in mind as she shot him an annoyed look. Jiraiya grinned before going over and leaning down at Naruto, I'll be seeing you soon, Neo Yondaime Hokage. Tsunade and Shizune blinked upon hearing the nickname Jiraiya just gave Naruto. Just get out, Tsunade replied as Jiraiya smirked and went on his way, closing the door behind him. Neo Yondaime Hokage, Shizune repeated. Jiraiya baka, Tsunade interjected, I'm going have to keep an eye on him. I'd hate to have my son adopt his perverted bad habits. Bad habits, Shizune mumbled under her breath mockingly, this coming from someone who gambles chronically. I'd hate for my little brother to adopt your gambling habits. What was that? Tsunade said with a touch of venom in her voice. Shizune paled and replied sheepishly, oh nothing Tsunade-sensei, what do you know? It's time for my medical training. Shizune ran out of Tsunade's presence before anything else was said between them. The slug Sanin was now alone with her boy. Sighing to herself, she said, why do I put up with them? Naruto started gurgling as she smiled and turned her attention to him. What's that? Tsunade said playfully to Naruto, because I have to. That's your decree as Lord Hokage. Giving a motherly laugh, you're no Lord Hokage in this house, you're my little Naru-chan and you're going to learn medic jutsu and how to be a medic nin. Yes you are. Oh, yes you are. Naruto smiled back at her with his toothless smile almost as if he understood her words, causing Tsunade to smile even brighter. Unknown to Tsunade was that the entire scene was being watched by Sandaime who was looking upon them from his specially crystal ball. Needless to say, he was very happy for both Naruto and Tsunade. That night, many in Konoha were all fast asleep save for Konoha police and the Anbu. Meanwhile at the Senju residence, Tsunade was sleeping peacefully in her room. All was serene when Naruto started crying in his crib. Tsunade woke up to this and got up off her futon. Going over to Naruto, Tsunade picked him up and held him, resting his head on her shoulders while gently rocking him in her arms. Naruto soon calmed down and quieted much to Tsunade's delight. After another minute, Tsunade said thoughtfully, I bet you're hungry my little Naru-chan. Tsunade sat down on her futon with Naruto and prepared to breastfeed him. Just as she is about to open her kimono however, the door to her room opened, revealing Shizune cradling something in her arms. I'm sorry Tsunade-sensei, Shizune said, I came earlier to change Naruto's diaper and bring him back. I didn't want to wake you. Tsunade saw that Shizune was cradling a fully awake Naruto in her arms. The slug Sanin saw that something was definitely wrong with this scene. Wait a minute, Tsunade exclaimed, if that child is Naruto, then who am I? Looking down at her arms, Tsunade saw that she was cradling a wooden log in her arms. While cradling the log, she turned and saw Naruto, quietly attempting to crawl and sneak away from her towards the opened window. As Naruto was making his way towards the window, he then felt an extreme bloodlust approaching and coming from behind him. As he fearfully and slowly turned his head, he thought of one word that he thought might have saved him with puppy eyes as he sucked his right thumb, Mama. Outside the house, Sandaime Hokage was taking a late-night stroll around the village when suddenly, bomb! Sandaime turned to see a small figure coming flying from out of Tsunade's bedroom window. The figure was sent flying high into the skies across the village. There they go again, Sandaime said sympathetically knowing all too well who that figure was, he'll never learn. On the other side of town, the same small figure came crashing hard into the ground, forming a crater in it. The figure transformed back into his real self and was in much pain. He was heavily bruised all over. Wow, Jiraiya mourned, so close, damn that Shizune. I was just a few seconds from paradise, and I was really looking forward to having some of that good stuff she treats Naruto to. Jiraiya slowly picked himself from out of the crater before checking himself for whatever additional damages was done to him as a result from the impact to the ground. In any case, he was in a whole world of pain. Meanwhile, a very pissed off Tsunade was in her bedroom standing with a broken log in her right hand looking out through the window while Shizune was looking on with a pale and frightened expression. She threw the log pieces out of the window before calming down. Perverted excuse for a life form, Tsunade stated, so much for his word about not coming between a mother and her son. I just might kill him if he pulls that stunt again. Turning to Shizune, Tsunade walked over to her and took Naruto from her. Thank you, Shizune, Tsunade thanked, I'll take it from here. Shizune nodded before quickly exiting the room and closing the door behind her. Tsunade then went over to her futon and sat down on it with Naruto in her arms. Opening her kimono, Tsunade began breastfeeding Naruto, who accepted her nourishment with adoring want. My, you were certainly hungry, weren't my little Naru-chan? Tsunade smiled affectionately while caressing Naruto's soft blonde hair. After a couple of more minutes, Naruto was done drinking her milk before Tsunade closed her kimono and stood back up, rocking and singing him to sleep. I'm feeling lazy about writing a song of any sort. Therefore, think up of any bedtime songs you know of that a mother would sing to her newborn. After another 12 minutes, Naruto fell fast to sleep in her arms.